Hey everyone, Sergey here of It's a Thing Imagery, and I'm back with another video. Today I'm in Lynn Canyon, and the snow has fallen so beautifully the last couple days. The drive up was breathtaking, and I'm going to show you guys one of my favorite things to do in a high contrast environment. It's called HDR Photography, and you don't need an expensive camera to do this. Low budget cameras work all the time, and I use this all the time with my landscapes with my Canon R5. So high budget, low budget, doesn't matter. This is a useful trick for everybody. I can't wait to show you. Let's go for a walk. So one of the biggest benefits to HDR photography is you get to retain your details in your highlights and your shadows as well as your midtones. And HDR expands that range beyond your camera's dynamic range. Now, a lot of new cameras have really nice dynamic range already at the lowest native ISO, I should say. But a lot of low budget cameras don't actually have the most dynamic range built in. So HDR photography comes in here. The objective is to take, in a single scene, a selection of photos ranging from an overexposed shot, a well-exposed shot, and an underexposed shot. So you combine all these in Photoshop, and then it gives you the most dynamic range in your scene when you open it up in Camera RAW. So I also have a trick that lets you use this in an environment that doesn't really have any moving, like water or moving images. You don't have to set up a tripod. You just set your camera up with these settings, and it'll make your images pop out a lot more having that extra dynamic range. Okay, so as you guys can see behind me, the sun is super bright. And then we have a lot of this like mid to low shadow snow in the background. So once I get down to the river, I'll show you guys the settings that I use, the ISO that I use, how to get into auto exposure bracketing, and what mode to put your firing at. So like how to get your camera into burst mode, at least with the Canon R5. And I'll show you why I use burst mode above using a tripod. So let's keep going. Trying really hard not to slip and fall. That would suck. It's a long way down. But holy, it's so beautiful down there. I'm actually gonna give this HDR a go right now. So go into auto exposure bracketing, put it up to 5 shots on either end, up to 3 stops. Put my camera into burst mode, which it already is. And I'll fire off these 5 shots. And you can see I have those 5 different exposures, allowing for all the detail in the shadows, highlights, and midtones. I think I'm gonna head right down over there, and I'll show you guys how I set up for HDR. Okay, so I've landed here. I think this is where I'll set up for you guys. And I'll show you how I get HDR photography simple and effectively. I've set up here with my Canon R5, and I have the Ninja 5 Plus, so I can show you guys exactly what I'm doing on the screen. So I'm going to go into this screen here on the R5. This is called exposure, auto exposure bracketing. And I could set it to 5 different steps. So I like to go about 3 stops above and below. Just like that, 3 stops above and below. And then I'm going to ensure that I have this on any high-speed continuous or burst mode because it'll automatically go through and take the shots for you without you having to take your finger off the shutter. That lets you hold the camera still for a shorter period of time, and then that'll help align the shots later in post. Okay, so I have that set up, I have that set up. My ISO is at 100, and I have set my aperture to f8. I'll use a depth of field preview to check it out. Nice, foreground is in focus. So now I'm going to line up the shot, and then you'll hear the 5 shots go off. I'll take them now. And you saw that when I did that, it took 5 photos, and it took them all at different exposures. So here are the shots. I've got one overexposed, slightly overexposed, underexposed by a stop, underexposed by 2 stops, and my regularly exposed photo. So you saw that I don't have a tripod. I don't need to do too much work for this. I just set those settings. I see a high contrast scene. I want to get the most out of my dynamic range. So I set it up this way, and then I can put it right into post. So super easy, effective, on the fly. It doesn't really work too well with moving subjects. The only reason being is because there's ghosting. So if there's water and it's moving around, you'll notice like these artifacts in the shot. You don't want to do it with that. So moving subjects are a no-go for this, but nice, crisp, not evolving landscapes are my favorite to use this trick for. Anyway, so I'll take you into the editing room and show you how it works. Okay, so we're back in the editing suite, and I've offloaded my pictures here, and you'll see that I have the main exposure, and then I have 1, 2, 3, 4. So you have 5 total pictures. Now, I made the mistake of having my IBIS off. I actually had a project earlier where I had to turn it off and forgot to turn it back on. So I have another set of photos I'm going to show you guys, but I do want to show you what happens if your shutter speed is too slow and you blend an HDR shot together. So I'm going to load these, press enter. Since they're raw, Camera RAW will open up. Nice and fast. And then you highlight them all, right click, merge to HDR. Okay, so you'll have align images on. I typically keep the deghosting off because it can leave some artifacts. I've played around with the shot already just to see what the deghosting will do, and for all intents and purposes, I like to keep it off. So I'm gonna merge these. Takes a second. Okay, so now we have our shot. I'm just gonna drop this here. And you'll see that you have all this detail up here, and then you have all this detail in the shadows. You can overexpose a little bit just to see. But what happens, what I wanted to show you guys, when you have a slow shutter speed, you get this kind of artifacting here. So typically if you have IBIS, you can hold that exposure open for like a pretty decent amount of time. But alas, I had it turned off and I'm not going to use this. This was taken at 1/15 of a second, and normally I can pull off 1/4 of a second with IBIS on, but unfortunately I did not have such luck. So I'm going to cancel that. Bring up Bridge again. And then I'm going to actually use the shot I took at the stairs. So another good thing about this set of 5 rather than the other is this has much higher contrast. So highlight them all again, right click, merge to HDR. You can also use Option M, put that together. Align images. I do not auto apply settings, keep the deghosting off, and then merge. Let it do its thing. Okay, it's done. So this is a great example of what HDR photography can be really useful for. So this is the main exposure, right? They look nearly identical. So if you drop the highlights, you see that the sky is this like off, overexposed gray. But if you drop the highlights here, it actually has a lot of detail. So that's one of the clear advantages of HDR. And then you overexpose or bring up the shadows, sorry, and you get a bit more detail. See how much brighter that is than here? You have highlights dropped all the way down and shadows all the way up on both. And you have much more dynamic range. And the beautiful thing about this is that you don't have to have the most expensive camera to pull this off. This just gives you that much more range. Even with the Canon R5, it's a really beastly camera, has a lot of information, and you can still do this and still make it useful. So don't be afraid to try this out with your lower budget cameras and see how much more information you can pull off. I do suggest, if you don't have IBIS, to try doing this on a tripod, or if you're out in really bright conditions and your shutter speed is something that you're comfortable using handheld, pull this off. Another thing I wanted to show you guys, Photoshop is really good in the sense that it'll align your images really well. That's the other thing about not having to use a tripod and why I use this all the time. It's very convenient. So, okay, I've got this shot here. I'm gonna reset those settings. And if you look over, that drops over, you'll see a little bit of movement in my image. You can kind of see, especially from these two, if we go over here and go back and forth, you can kind of see that the image shifts a little bit, not just because it got brighter, but because I physically moved. It'll align the images so well. Like I said, it's just super convenient. Now that I have this, I'm gonna drop that down. I'm gonna get into how I edit my pictures. I like the highlights pretty low. I like to open up my shadows a fair bit. I could bring back a little bit, just not to make it too flat. Play with my whites. And then bring up the blacks a little bit. I like to leave the exposure for the very end, just after doing my color work, rather than doing it at the start. The exposure can kind of push saturations into a different way, and I kind of like to wait till the end to see what I've done with my colors and how much that can help it pop. Bring in my vibrance. I leave saturation alone. 60 looks nice. And then once I'm done that, the first thing I go to do is calibration. This is one thing that's really nice about Lightroom and Camera RAW, is it has this. I would use the mobile versions much more if they had this option, but alas, they do not. So I'm gonna bring this over. This will teal up the blues, make the oranges a bit more red, and play around with this. No, I'm gonna keep that as is. Okay, drop that down. Next thing I'm gonna do is go into my contrast curve. I put 4 points usually. I almost always bring up my blacks, lift the shadows a little, and then add a bit of a toe. And then play around with the highlights. And then I'll drop the whites down a little bit. Maybe drop the midtones down too. Okay. Not too much, kind of flattens out the image, but also brings up the black in a nice filmic way. And then I give myself a bit of a split tone here, which teals into the res into the highlights and then teals into the shadows a little. Same thing with the greens. Green magenta, I'll push green into the highlights and magenta into the shadows. And then with the blue, depending on the shot, I think I like this winter tone a bit more, so I'm gonna bring the whites over into the blue. Okay, so this is on and off. See, that's already doing a lot of work. One thing with how I edit is it's always a little bit at a time. You do your passes, and then there's a greater net result at the end. Okay, drop that. Go into detail, sharpening. I like to sharpen up to like 70 or 80. And then here's a neat trick. If you hold down Option or Alt, go into masking, you can actually define which edges you want sharpened. So something like this that has a lot of edges, I'll bring down a lot. And there we go. And then I'll go into my color mixer. And then I usually start with, I just follow the HSL, so hue, saturation, luminance. I kind of just logically follow that. So first thing I like to play with almost always are the blues. Bring that over into the teals a bit more. I like the aquas brought down back a little bit blue, have them meet in the middle. The purples, not really seeing too much here, but I'm gonna bring that over just in case. The oranges, bring that red more. Now the yellows, this one I go back and forth between. Depending on the shot, like, this is the PNW, so you know there's evergreen forests everywhere. So bringing this into the green wouldn't hurt the image, but then also bringing it into the orange side kind of makes it feel like there's an orange, like sunsetty glow. I think playing around with this, I'm gonna stick to that PNW vibe I was telling you. There's already a lot of orange with that railing, and this will just add a bit more color separation. And the greens, just kind of playing with that flare in the middle. I'll bring that over to the yellow side here. And then the reds, we have a bit of that. Ooh, I like what that's doing in the railing. So I'm gonna bring that over more magenta. Okay, saturation. This one I just start top down. So I'll go to the red. Kind of see a bit of it in the snow and some of it in the railing. It's not really doing too much, so I'm kind of just gonna leave that as is. Now this one, how much pop do I want out of that railing here? I like my colors a bit more vibrant, so I'm gonna bring that orange up a bit more. And the yellow. Something wrong with just like toggling it, seeing where it's going, and what works to taste. I'm gonna drop those a little bit down just to get a bit more out of the trees here. Greens. Greens you can kind of very barely see in the shadows of the yellows. And those branches are kind of right around here is where I'm looking. Aquas, pop those suckers up, and then same with the blues. If you take the blues away, you're kind of losing that classic orange teal look, so I'm gonna bring that up a bit more. Purples, yeah, not doing anything. And magentas, same thing, not really doing anything. Lastly, the luminance. And bring that down, kind of add some like filmic density in the reds. Probably, how's the orange look? Actually, I think I like the orange as is. Bringing it down makes it too dark and muddy, and bringing it up, it just kind of washes it out. So I'm gonna leave that alone. If you double click, that's how I'm zeroing these out. Handy little tool. And same with the yellows. Oh, actually I'm gonna brighten up those yellows too. There's a bit of yellow in the railing, but I'm fine with what that's doing. Go back down to the greens. Bring up that flare. Aquas and blues. I'm gonna brighten up the blues a bit. Okay. Leave that alone. Sometimes I like to play with the color grading, sometimes I don't. You can also flatten out or brighten your shadows and highlights here in a pleasant way. Today I'm just gonna leave that as is. And maybe I'll add a bit more coolness into the shadows here. Get a bit more of that color separation going. And then in the midtones, warm that up a tad. Let's see what happens over here. And then the highlights, because it's winter, I'm also gonna cool those off a bit more. This kind of plays differently though than the highlights that you'll find in the exposure tab. If you look up here, by dropping this down, this kind of gives us that muddy white that we saw earlier, rather than the nice clean highlight reduction that we'll get over here. Much cleaner. You can see it actually brings back a lot of that detail. Okay, get that back. And now I'm gonna up the whites a bit more, get a bit more pop, bring up the blacks to bring up the exposure a little bit. And then here is where I'll play with my contrast. Great. Now I'm gonna start masking. This is kind of where you can get into, is it digital photography, is it digital painting? purists will like to say, just leave it as it is, but people, when photography became a thing, would dodge and burn their photos in a way that would highlight and darken areas to add contrast into the scene. So for your purists out there, brushing stuff in is absolutely acceptable. It is your creative image after all. So I just added a new Radial Gradient, and then using this neat trick that I got taught from Calibrius's course, Zach, he likes to do a little bit of exposure and a little bit of dehaze. I used to just use exposure when I wanted to make an extra light source, but this trick makes the light source that much more believable. Okay, so we see here, it's kind of adding this nice glow. If you want to kind of give it that like angelic effect, you can really stretch that out. Dehaze it a little more just for that emphasis. I'm gonna overdo this just so you guys can see. See what the dehaze does? This is, let's see. This is just brightness, which is nice, right? But bring that back down. If we bring up the dehaze, it makes the light scatter. It makes the light scatter in like a much more pleasant way. So bring that in. Bring the exposure down a little bit. See what that looks like on and off. Yeah, look at that. Like that makes the sun just that much more believable. And the nice thing too, is because we have all this information in the HDR, we're not actually like totally overexposed here, not just yet. The sun would be, and that's fine, but there's still some information left in the highlights here. Okay, I'm gonna zoom out a little bit more, and then I'm going to simply brush in some detail in the branches. I'm gonna add a little bit of a light source. Kind of like the light's hitting the branches really nicely. I want to brighten this up. I like that patch of snow. Down there. Nice. Okay, so here's the on and off of brushing in some extra light hitting the branches. See, and just small little bits at a time. Do another one. Now I'm going to darken a little bit of the branches as well. Same brush size and just adding some shape to the image. The areas that are kind of already dark, really bringing that together. Yeah, nice. Lovely, and then maybe a little bit here in the railing, give that depth. And then I'm going to do one more pass, and this is, I like to use the brush really large when I'm vignetting. Zoom out a bit, and then just kind of lightly tap one at a time. Don't want to go too hard with it, and give it this nice vignette. This brush is really soft, so even if you have it outside, you'll see a little bit of a difference. Here, and excellent. Yeah, that's looking really lovely. I'm actually going to bring back a little bit of that detail here. Bring that down. I think I darkened that up a little bit too much. And do a new brush. Bring it up a little bit more. Yeah, nice. Okay. Cool. So now that that's done, the work isn't over yet. So my favorite thing about Camera RAW, I don't like how Lightroom catalogs everything for you. I also don't like the layout. I've been using Camera RAW since 2008, or something similar to it, but Photoshop for me has been my editor of choice. Lightroom does very similar things. I just prefer this workflow rather than Photoshop. So, but one thing that's really nice is when I open this, it opens right up into Photoshop. So here you have your layer, right? First thing I might do is create a new layer using Command J, and then go into my spot healing brush and see what it looks like if I try to get rid of this flare. Yeah, you know what? Once we get over here, no, it's not really working. You know, that kind of works. That's believable. So I got rid of the flare. Found the flare to be a little bit distracting, and nobody will know the wiser that there was a flare there in the first place. That's one thing that you don't need to seek perfection in landscapes. You just need to, especially for social media, just do what's believable when you're cleaning stuff up. Anything else that I'm seeing? No, not really. Okay, so then the next thing I'm going to do, I'm going to color balance this. So sometimes you could get like a bit more color and color separation when you use your color balance. I also like to do a hue saturation layer, and I'll show you the effect of that right after. But if you bring in the reds here, see what it does to the shadows and the midtones? Kind of warms everything up. And I like to play around with this to taste. So bring in the magentas and then see what it looks like with those blues. See, the blues kind of feel purple, but when we add that hue saturation layer, I'll show you guys what happens. So I kind of like what this is doing. I also like to play with the shadows sometimes. I like pulling cyan into the shadows. Get a bit more of that color separation that I like so much. See, this is the net effect of that. And then go into hue saturation. Bring this over like a point or two. And like I said, it's just little things. Like this is 2 points. And already it's making like a little bit of a difference. You see this is reddening up, which is what I like. And you'll see that the blues go a bit more teal. Put all this together. I'll just group this for you guys. I'll show you the net effect. This is before, or this is now. This is before. See, there's a bit more like color contrast in here. So I really like doing that. The next thing I do, this is my favorite way to sharpen these photos. I go make a new layer and then Command Shift U desaturates it. Go into other, high pass, and do just 1 pixel, totally fine. And then bring it into overlay. So this sharpens things in a pleasant way. Doesn't look tacky, doesn't look noisy, but it brings back a little bit of that detail, which is really nice. So do that, and then the final step. I like to add what's called the Orton Effect. Make a new layer, stamp that together with Command Option Shift E, and then go to blur, Gaussian blur. I like to do like 5 pixels below the density of your camera's megapixel count, as opposed to what the megapixels ended up being after cropping or something. So I think it's the density of pixels that makes this a cleaner effect. I've tried this with, I had the Canon R, and that had 30 megapixels. I liked it like 25 pixels when I did that camera. So 40 pixels is great for a 45 megapixel camera. Press OK. It's gonna look a little bit weird. Go into image, brightness contrast, 20 and 80. Now you have this muddy mess. Bring it down to like, I like to sit between 15 and 10 with my landscapes. And it gives it, I don't know if you guys can see that, oops. It gives it this subtle ethereal glow. You see that? It's just really pretty and nice and soft. And the reason I like to do that high pass sharpen is because I know I'm going to be doing this second after that, and it just kind of brings in a little bit more of that detail without losing too much out of here. I could just like reduce the opacity, but I like the overall glow effect, so I'm just gonna keep that. All right, and now I'm going to save. I also, actually, you know what? One thing I really like about Photoshop is you can actually get into your color settings and manage your color nicely. Like, I don't think Lightroom actually has color management that's that effective. This one, you have a whole list of what you can color manage with. So I like my RGB at standard sRGB, and then everything to convert to my working spaces, so that way if there's a mismatch, I know that when I'm done, what I'm seeing on screen is what I'll see on my phone, what other people will see on their phone, and I don't have like any desaturation or any weirdness going on. So just one thing about Photoshop that I also really like. Okay, so now I'm going to save. Command Option Shift S. This is how I like to save my photos. JPEG maximum, progressive, optimize checked off, embed color profile, so that way I know that it's sRGB, and also convert to sRGB. After some trial and error, these two settings checked together seem to be the way to make sure the colors match what I'm seeing on my phone and on my computer. This is great for if you need to do specific image sizes when you're outputting. This is the maximum size that my camera has. This is just like the raw information. But you can like downscale, like if you're making a YouTube thumbnail, I usually do like 1800 on the long edge, and there you go. And save that. Go into my photos here and save away. And I also like to save the Photoshop document, so that way if I need to come back and make any changes later, I can do so. Okay, well, thanks for joining me on how to do HDR photography. It's simple, it could be effective, you can get the most you can out of your dynamic range, and it doesn't matter what budget your camera meets. You can do this on any camera. Get a tripod, a cheap one if you are concerned about the lack of IBIS in your camera, or maybe get a lens with image stabilization, but this is something I use almost all the time with my landscape photography. High contrast scene, boom, done. 5 photos, you just bang them off and bring them into Photoshop, lines it up for you, and there you go. So if you like this content, as usual, like, comment, subscribe. If you found this useful, let me know, and I'll see you guys in the next one.